I made 100 horror movies in LEGO. And for movie number 1, I decided to go with It 2017, due to it being the highest grossing horror movie of all time. I started off by making Pennywise and giving him his signature red balloon, and then I made all 7 members of the Losers Club and gave them some bikes and weapons so that they can go fight Pennywise. I also made Pennywise in his spider form both from the original 1990 miniseries and It Chapter 2. Next I thought I'd do some slasher movies, and I decided to kick it off with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So from the original, I of course had to make Leatherface, and then I also made Chop Top from Texas Chainsaw 2, Eddie Sawyer from Texas Chainsaw 3, and Vilmer from The Next Generation. Then in the 2003 remake, Leatherface got a new family, the Hewitts, so let's go ahead and add Charlie Hewitt Jr. from the remake and Eric and Dean Hewitt from the 2006 prequel to the remake. Texas Chainsaw 3D is another reboot, and I decided to include the protagonist, Heather, who is the only protagonist from the franchise to be related to Leatherface. Then from the latest timeline, I included Verna Sawyer from 2017's Leatherface, as well as a random influencer from the newest Texas Chainsaw film. And although all these characters are from different timelines, I thought it'd be nice for them to all get together for a nice meal. The next villain I made was Michael Myers from the Halloween franchise, one of the scariest and most iconic horror villains out there. And since he's known for his gruesome kills, I figured I'd make a few of them. Starting off with the original Halloween, I went with the kill on Bob when he pins him to the wall with a knife. For Halloween 2, I recreated the scene where Michael kills the nurse with a syringe, and since Michael wasn't even in Halloween 3, I just made the kill where the guy blew himself up in his own car. However, Michael Myers returns in Halloween 4, I mean obviously, but one of the victims was Brady, who tried to shoot him but ended up with a broken neck. In Halloween 5, Michael massacres a police station, so I figured I'd include a policeman for this one, and for Halloween 6, I recreated the death of John Strode, who was electrocuted until his head exploded. For Halloween H2O, I made the guy who got killed with an ice skate to the face, and then for Halloween Resurrection, I made the guy who got stabbed through the neck with a shotgun. After that was the 2007 reboot, which also has a knife to the wall kill, and its 2009 sequel also has a nurse massacre, although I'd have to say it was much more brutal than the original. The 2018 Halloween is once again a new timeline, this time erasing all but the original movie, and the kill that I decided to include from this one is the kid that Michael strangled in a car. Then for Halloween Kills, I knew I had to recreate the scene where Michael slaughters an entire team of firefighters, one of the most impressively choreographed scenes in the entire series. Finally, for the last movie in the franchise, Halloween Ends, I made Michael's death scene, but he's died like 5 times by now, so who knows how long that's gonna last. The third big slasher villain in this video is Jason Voorhees, the hockey mask killer himself, and I'll be recreating some of his best kills, starting off with Jack, who was stabbed in the neck through the bottom of his bed. For Friday Part 2, I made Scott's death, which was the end result of a series of events including stepping into a trap, hanging from a tree upside down, and having his throat slit with a machete. And for Part 3, I decided to go with Ali, since I thought it'd be cool to show his hand get cut off. Next is the poorly named 4th installment in the franchise, Friday the 13th, the final chapter, in which Jason himself dies by getting stabbed in the face with his machete. Then he comes back 2 years later in Jason Lives and twists someone's head off. And in The New Blood, he kills someone by picking her up in a sleeping bag and slamming her against a tree. I guess maybe after 7 movies, Jason got bored of hanging around summer camps, because in Jason Takes Manhattan, he goes to New York, where he can be a new man and punch a guy's head off. Then maybe Jason wanted cheaper rent or nicer neighbors, because the 9th movie is Jason Goes to Hell, and in this one, Jason dies again, this time by explosion. And then once again returns in Jason X, where he dunks someone's face into liquid nitrogen and then slams it into the counter, causing it to shatter everywhere. In the 2009 reboot, Jason once again kills someone in a sleeping bag, but this time he roasts her alive. The last of the movies that Jason appears in is Freddy vs. Jason, in which he faces off against Freddy Krueger, so I think it only makes sense to do his movies next. Because of Freddy Krueger's unique powers, he's able to pull off some really memorable kills, and the one that probably comes to mind first for most people is Glenn's death, where he's eaten by his own bed. In Freddy's Revenge, he annihilates a group of pool partying teens, and then in Nightmare 3, he kills Jennifer by slamming her face through a TV in his chest. In Nightmare 4, Freddy kills Debbie by snapping her arms while she's lifting weights, and then for Nightmare 5, I recreated the scene where Mark gets turned into paper and then sliced up by Freddy. For Freddy's Dead, I made the scene where John falls thousands of feet to his death, and in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Freddy's claw kills a couple of guys working on the movie set. Finally, for the 2010 remake, I made Freddy's original fiery death in the burning building. My favorite slasher villain is up next, Chucky from Child's Play, and I made Chucky from the first movie as well as Andy from the second, and then the updated scarred version of Chucky from Child's Play 3. The character I included from Bride of Chucky was of course Chucky's bride, Tiffany, and then for Seed of Chucky, I made Glenn. The 50th movie of the video was Curse of Chucky, from which I made Nika with a custom wheelchair. Then for Cult of Chucky, I made the grown-up Andy Barclay along with the Chucky head that he tortures. For the Scream franchise, what I figured I'd do was make a Ghostface killer from each movie, starting off with Stu Macher and Billy Loomis. Then for Scream 2 was Miss Loomis, and then in Scream 3 it was Roman Bridger, in Scream 4 Jill Roberts, Scream 5 was Amber, and finally in Scream 6 was Detective Bailey. And since I've already got the Ghostface figure, I thought I'd make Scary Movie as well. One of my favorite figures to make was Ash from The Evil Dead, the reason being his iconic chainsaw hand, which I think looks really cool in LEGO. Movie 60 is Trick or Treat, and this figure that I decided to make was Sam, for which I used a scarecrow face to represent the bag over his head. Now moving on to some axe murderers, starting off with Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, we can see that he's wearing a black suit and looks like he's enjoying some 80s music. After that is Winnie the Pooh from Blood and Honey, who is sure to be one of the most iconic horror characters of the 21st century. And lastly, I obviously had to include Jack Torrance from The Shining, since he's probably the most recognizable axe wielder.
Here's Johnny!
And since we're on the topic of Stephen King movie adaptations, let's take a look at a few more. I bought this red car for the movie Christine, and I'll also use it to run over a kid so he can be buried and brought back in a pet cemetery. Speaking of pets, I got Kate Bishop's dog from the new Marvel CMF to represent Cujo. Then the last of the Stephen King movies I made was Carrie, and I knew I just had to recreate the iconic look where she's drenched in blood. One of my personal favorite horror movies is Silence of the Lambs, and the figure I made was Hannibal Lecter. I put him in a red hand truck and used the Loki headpiece to represent his muzzle. Now let's move on to some more family-friendly movies that I would still consider horror, starting off with the Jurassic Park franchise. For Jurassic Park, I took out this T-Rex breakout set, and I grabbed the T-Rex and Ian Malcolm out to recreate the rampage through the city from Jurassic Park 2. Then I grabbed this raptor from the LEGO Movie 2 and recreated one of the weirdest scenes in the Jurassic franchise. Then, for the Jurassic World trilogy, I just got out a few sets that I've collected over the past few years. Next we have Gremlins, one of the only horror movies to have any actual minifigures, so for Gremlins 1 I got out this figure of Spike, and then for the sequel I dressed him up in a suit. After that, I got a set that I've wanted for almost a decade, the Ghostbusters Ecto-1. It has all 4 Ghostbusters and the iconic Cadillac that they drive around in. I also bought this Slimer figure from Ghostbusters 2, so they'd have someone to catch, and I also added Trevor from Ghostbusters Afterlife, as well as a trash can to represent the 2016 reboot. Rounding out the family-friendly horror movies is of course Terrifier, starring the lovable Art the Clown. He has some of the most horrifying kills I've ever had the displeasure of witnessing, including when he saws a girl in half, and a scene from the second one that I'm going to refrain from describing. Next up is Leprechaun, and I just got the actual Leprechaun CMF figure off of Bricklink for this one. And then one of the saddest horror movies has to be Train to Busan, and to recreate this one I got a couple of zombies to chase a minifig on the Hogwarts Express. 85 is The Purge, and for this one I made the Statue of Liberty killer, and then the 86 movie is Megan, the second to last killer doll in the video, and for her accessory I gave her the ear that she ripped off. Then I made one of the Tethered from Us, of course giving her scissors as an accessory, and the newest movie in this video is FNAF, and for this one I took some inspiration from Master Builders and used Fozzie Bear to represent Freddy. One of the most critically acclaimed horror movies was the original Exorcist, and for this one I of course made Reagan. She's in her pajamas, and you can swap out her head for the Emperor's to show that she's possessed, and I also got a bunch of small green pieces to recreate the scene where she projectile vomits onto Father Merrin. Going from one Catholic franchise to another, next up is The Conjuring, and I made the woman who got possessed from the first one, as well as Ed and Lorraine Warren from 2 and 3. Then I made the Annabelle doll that used to seriously give me nightmares, and the Nun from the Nun 1 and 2, and also The Conjuring 2 I suppose. Movie 96 is Saw, and for this one I made Billy the Puppet and the iconic reverse bear trap, which I made using a bucket handle. Now for a few classic horror movies, starting off with Nosferatu, which is the oldest movie in this video. And yes, the Dobby head does look a little funny, but it's the best I could do. Then I got the Mummy figure to represent, obviously, the Mummy. And the penultimate movie that I recreated was Frankenstein, which is probably what most people think of when they think of classic horror monsters, and since Frankenstein's monster already has a minifigure, I just used that. Finally, for the 100th movie in the video, I recreated what is probably the most iconic scene in horror history, the shower scene from Psycho. Well, that's about all for today's video. I really appreciate y'all being so patient for the Halloween special this year. It took a lot longer to make than I'd expected, but make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing because I have another one coming out on Saturday. I know that's after the spooky season, but it's still coming, and there are a bunch of Halloween sets and minifigures that I've made, and I'm really excited for y'all to see them, so stay tuned for that. But anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. Have a great day, and go build something awesome.